Whoever is 203-637-2024, if you're supposed to be at this meeting, email or text someone on this committee and let them know it's you. Andy Deuce.
Promote Tony Jones.
Yeah, Leslie, Mary Ford is also in the waiting room.
Okay, Mary
I
Ford,
see
I
that.
allow Mary to talk. Okay, here we go. We're still setting up.
Andy is in the waiting room too.
Mary Ford, can you please unmute yourself and state your name? Mary Ford. All right, Mary's having trouble unmuting herself. I'm not sure.
Andy Deuce.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to remove her ability to talk until, we'll try Mary again. Mary, figure out where you see raise hand. We're gonna ask you to raise your hand later. Okay, Andy Deuce.
We
Okay.
need Tony Jones.
No, Tony's been on.
It's already up. Tony's already up. So, okay, Andy Deuce. Please unmute yourself and state your name, Andy Deuce.
Andy Deuce, look at that picture.
Andy Deuce, BET.
All right,
What
there you go.
picture?
You're coming up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anybody else?
Laura Erickson.
Okay, Laura. I'm allowing you to talk, Laura. Can you please state your name? Unmute yourself and state your name.
Laura Erickson, BET.
All right.
Yes.
Up you go. Debbie Krosheim, GCTV, Howard Richmond, Stephanie Cowie, Ken Borsick. I think we're good. Angela Giancarelli.
Angela could state her name.
Okay, is she going to be a panelist? Is she going to be speaking
No,
later?
no, and there are a lot of people on already who really won't be panelists, but you know, she's
Well,
fine.
we shouldn't have anyone up as a panelist that is not going to be speaking.
We've let up some BET members that will not be
Oh,
speaking.
BET members are good too. Okay, so the rules of the road. Everyone on the panel can unmute yourself. I'm going to mute everyone, and you only, and I may even mute you during the meeting. So also, if you're not part of the current discussion, you should stop your videos so that all you show up as is an icon to reduce the clutter and confusion. So anyone who's not part of the first part of the agenda, please turn off your video and mute yourself. I'm going to mute everyone right now, and then you're going to have to unmute yourself to talk, and Leslie's going to start the meeting. So I'm muting everyone but Leslie. Okay, Leslie, you're unmuted. You can start the meeting, and good luck.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to our Budget Committee meeting of April 14th, our first televised BET meeting for this series of meetings that will occur over the next 2 weeks, including the BET meeting next Monday, the public hearing next Tuesday evening, a workshop for BET members, and finally the BET budget approval meeting on April 27th. So we're doing this meeting by Zoom. It's our first BET meeting using Zoom and television together. And so we ask you to bear with us as we all are bearing with the changes that we have due to the coronavirus issues and emergency. So we will start today's agenda with a request for budget adjustments coming from the Board of Education. We call it ED11 for the Board of Education. The amount is $1,200,000, and it's for an additional appropriation. Actually, before we get started here, I do want to, because this is a different format, to identify each of our BET members, if they could just identify themselves, BET Budget Committee members, if they could identify themselves. Their pictures are up. Shall we start with you? Jeff, you're in my top row. You just want to introduce yourself and just your name, and we'll go on to Leslie and Deborah, just because of the order of my screen.
Jeff Raymer, BET.
Leslie?
Had to unmute myself. Leslie Moriarty, BET.
Deborah House, BET.
So now we've introduced our members, and we have the item being presented by Dr. Jones and Mr. O'Keefe, and if they would identify themselves and give us a description of the $1.2 million that they're requesting in this application. Thank you for attending and bearing with us and joining us a little bit early, which we thank you very much for.
Hi, this is Dr. Jones. I'm going to actually turn it over to Sean O'Keefe. This was for the interim request of the 1.2 million to cover a shortfall in the current year's budget. So, Mr. O'Keefe.
I think you need to unmute yourself, Sean.
Thank you very much. This is Sean O'Keefe, and I must say this is probably the best run Zoom meeting I've been to so far, having experienced the one last night, and it was quite shocking, actually. So as you all know, we've been having some difficulty with outplaced tuition. I guess we announced it back in December, and we had taken a number of steps to offset that, but we're at a point now where, after speaking with Roland about the calendar, we had determined that if we were going to go for an interim appropriation, even if it was a contingent interim appropriation, we would have to do it for the April 20 BET and RTM meetings. Obviously, since that time, a lot has happened to the world. And so right now, we have submitted the paperwork back in March. The Board of Ed approved the interim appropriation to move forward on March 26th. And as you may know, the RTM Education Committee moved to or voted to defer this to the May meeting. So a little bit of background on this. As I said, we have been working this exposure down since December, and we had been making some progress, but sometime in early March, mid-March, we learned that there was a number of additional students that required outplaced tuition and or settlements, and as a result, our exposure in that line is back up to $1,120,000. And in addition to that, we also listed another $40,000 related to custodial overtime associated with the deep cleaning as a result of the coronavirus. Plus, one other additional item for $40,000 was the $40,000 for the shoring up of the Cardinal Stadium bleachers that would be required to keep them shored up through January through June. The GAF had been paying for it since I believe in July through December. So that adds up to the $1.2 million. Now, since that time, as a result of the coronavirus and the closure of the schools, we've identified some additional savings opportunities, the largest of which is related to transportation. As you know, we closed schools on beginning on March 12th, and we're still closed, and right now we're anticipating being closed at least until May 20th. With that, about running of the buses, the cost of the buses is about $50,000 a day. So there could be some substantial savings there. However, after the closure, the governor came out with Executive Order 7R, which required the districts, all of the districts, to contact their transportation vendors and to reopen the contract to ensure that drivers were continuing to be active and paid for wages and benefits. Also in the executive order was some vague language as it relates to fleet and or fleet. So we're not quite sure what all that means. But in the meantime, all of the districts are complying with the executive order, and and starting to negotiate with their vendors. We have notified officially STA on April 10th of our willingness to enter into a negotiation. And with that, we would require significant detail as it relates to their actual and reasonable costs. And I'm using the exact words in the executive order. So I do know that there's a very limited number of districts who have already completed their negotiations. And they kind of range from a 60% total contract value for this period of time. In our case, from March 12th through the end of the year, I estimate that the gross billings per the contract would be in the range of about $3.4 to $3.5 million. So if we're going to be in that 60 to 80% range, the potential savings could be anywhere from $700,000 to $1.4 million just from transportation alone. And that would, not only include home to school, but private schools, athletics, field trips, special ed, transportation, and so on. So in addition to that, there could be some fuel savings. We're also looking at other areas unrelated to transportation, energy and utilities, daily substitute teachers. And if you recall, we did implement a limited expense freeze back in February 20th of 2020. So we're expecting to see some savings from there. So we've got a lot of balls in the air right now. And I think the RTM and the BET recognize that it may be worthwhile to put this request off until May, now that we know that May is a viable alternative. I'll stop there, take any questions. Leslie?
Jeff, do you have a
Leslie,
question?
you're muted. Yeah.
I'm muted? It doesn't say muted. Jeff, do you have a question? Jeff is muted.
Yeah.
Jeff is muted. I think that Jenny has to. Okay, you're unmuted. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the residual question then is about the $40,000 for the rental on the bleachers and the $40,000 for the deep cleaning. If the savings are enough to cover the outplacements, do you have elsewhere the $80,000 to cover the other two components?
Yeah, I'm speaking for myself. Tony, you might want to weigh in, but I believe that for one, on the custodial overtime, that $40,000 was estimated based on the first 2 weeks of March, which was about $18,000. I checked yesterday, and since that time, there's been no additional custodial overtime. So that number could come down. But I think what you're asking is, do you think we could contain that given the savings that we potentially expect? I think we could contain that, quite honestly. It's the big nut, which is the outplaced tuition, that we just don't know yet. Jeff, you are on mute.
Leslie has I'm sorry, Jeff, Leslie, you're on mute, so I think thank you.
Yes, I just unmuted myself. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the special education cost. Clearly, those are continuing, just like tuition expenses that we're paying for college students and the like. But I did want to ask about your look at that same budget line item as you look into fiscal 21. And I know that you expressed some concern when we met with you in February. You talked about that number with your Board of Ed, but if you could share with us what your thinking is right now about fiscal 21 and that $5.4 million budget line.
Sure. Well, what I've been working with Mary Ford on is to create a list without getting into names or identification of students of what our full year forecast is like in detail, whether it's an outplaced tuition or a settlement in a non-approved placement. And for Mary to assess for each of these students whether or not they would be exiting the program, graduating, or coming back into the system, moving out of town, or so on, and then to factor in, based on history, how many people we could expect, as a new placement. And based on that information, we think that the number is, versus the 5.4, which is flat year to year in our 2021 budget, we believe that number could be exposed by at least $1.5 million.
So 1.5 million, I just want to make sure I understood the number correctly. It's because it is a big hole in your budget. If that's not filled within the budget process, that puts pressure on you going into the new year. I wanted to ask a few questions on some. First of all, let me acknowledge that I know the Education Committee last night voted to postpone this item to May. It was on the recommendation of Mr. Bernstein, the Board of Ed Chair, and Dr. Jones, that you can wait the extra month, since May is now a meeting where the RTM will take up this item, as opposed to in prior years where it would have only been the budget. Our committee will discuss how we want to handle that once we finish getting the information. But I wanted to get a sense of summer school, because clearly there's some information out in the press and that you've given at other meetings that the expectations for academic achievement given distance learning is not what you would want them to be. You may be looking at changing or offering different kind of summer school, assuming that you have an ability to either open up or provide them even distance learning. I don't know. That would still incur some expenses for you. Some of that would be in June in this fiscal year, I guess, and some of that could be in next fiscal year. But can you, I know that it's still being developed, but can you share with us currently what you might be thinking about?
Tony, go ahead.
In regard to summer school, a lot of it will depend on the status of the building. If they keep us closed through the summer, we will have to really look at what we can do distance learning wise in the summer. If we are open by emergency order, they've lifted that, we're able to have face-to-face summer school, we would anticipate that we may have higher numbers this year of parents that definitely would want to access the summer school services. And even if we were offering a distance learning type of summer school, there would not be a huge cost savings, because the biggest cost that we have is staff to run the summer. We would save on the busing. You'd have some costs like that, but it would still have a cost to it that would be quite high, because we would have to hire the teachers for summer school like we always do.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question on the bleachers and the shoring for the bleachers. I know there's been some questions about the economic decision to maintaining the shoring while the bleachers are not being used. You don't know when they will be used, but I assume there's a cost to take down the shoring and there's a cost to put back the shoring for when you need it again. And that's compared to the $6,700 monthly cost as you look forward. But do you know what those numbers are?
It's about $6,700 a month to keep the shoring up. To take them down would cost $20,000, and then another $20,000 to put them back up. So and by taking them down, I think we're exposing ourselves to potential safety and potential litigation.
Okay, so that's about a 6-month break even just on numbers.
Exactly.
Not the litigation. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Leslie? Oh, you were on mute, Leslie, but okay. I have a few questions. I also attended the education meeting last night with Leslie Moriarty. And I know it seems like we're probably going to delay this to next month's budget committee. So a couple of things that might be helpful, and maybe you don't need to answer it now. There was a question last night about how much in the 5.4 million was legal costs. You suggested that it wasn't a big number. You kind of compared it from the town that you came from, but maybe some insight into that. And just a question, I'm just trying to see, am I understanding this correctly? The 5.4 million, the question was asked about how many students that represented. And I thought you said 32. So is it right to look at this as what we're paying is, that's roughly $170,000 per student? Is that right? Am I doing something wrong? I'm just trying to understand.
the $5.4 million, it does represent about 32. So the budget was based on 32, but the number where we are right now is about 30, I think it's 38, somewhere around there. And as far as the average cost of an outplacement, it can range from, if you send someone to CES in Trumbull, it can run $70,000. But for someone with more severe needs, medical needs, it could easily run into $400,000 or more.
Okay. And then just in terms of the capital, I know Leslie on the bleachers. Last night you mentioned that you're trying to do some work at the high school, but maybe potentially delays on getting some of the parts. Generally, I guess in terms of capital and where are you? Are you able to get any work done? Are you moving forward? I'd love to get a better sense of where you are with just capital projects in general.
Yeah,
I'm
Tony,
gonna-
go ahead, Tony.
So I was going to say, I know Dan is on here, and he did prepare a detailed memo yesterday. So we might invite him if we would like, just to share the details of that memo, where the status is on the work.
Leslie, you're talking with that. You're on mute, Leslie. We can't hear you.
Sorry. I did not attend all of the Education Committee's meeting last night because I was in finance. Could you just elaborate a little bit on what Deborah was saying about what was said about the high school, if Dan is not going to include it in his memo so that, it's shared with the public for the purposes of this meeting? Thank you.
Yeah, he hasn't hopped on, so I don't, I guess Sean and I can go ahead and answer that. He is, as far as.
Tony, he's here.
He's on now.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. So I don't know how in depth you want to get, but I submitted a pretty informative memo to Tony and Sean yesterday, just pertaining to some of the projects that we've been able to continue with during the shutdown. So I'll just name off a few of them. We can go into detail if you want, but we've continued with the cooling tower replacement at the high school. That is supposed to be up and running by the end of April. We've hit a couple of small snags with getting supplies, but we still should be up and running first week in May. So we will be, if we are able to get back in the schools by the end of May, we should be fine with that. The boiler retubing project at the high school is also in its second phase. We're doing the second boiler. That should be done probably within a week or so. No problems there, no issues with getting parts and material. We are currently, and one of the reasons I'm trying to stay muted is right outside my window, we're taking out a buried fuel tank at Havermeyer. That should be completed probably by the end of next week. We took out a fuel tank at the high school, and that also included some removal of some contaminated fill. We are almost completed with replacing the failing flexible connectors at the Performing Arts Center. I was just up there about a half an hour ago, and they're telling me that all the parts that we are concerned about will be replaced by the end of day Friday. So we're in good shape there. Hamilton Avenue, we're working on upgrading components to the HVAC system. Havermeyer, again, we're also doing some abatement in the lower level, just outside my other door. At Eastern Middle School, we had a hot water heater that failed on us 2 weeks ago. That hot water heater is part of the HVAC replacement project, but wasn't scheduled to be completed until later in the summer. We've been able to move that up and get that underway. Hopefully within the next 2 weeks, that'll be completed. Also at Eastern Middle School, there's some water service, including changing out some antiquated and failing valves and backflow preventer. Western Middle School, we continued with some work on the exterior windows. Some caulking had failed. We were able to replace the sealants around the windows. That's done. Western Middle School generator project is still going forward. We're able to access some of the areas that are not program space. We're able to put in some infrastructure for the new generator, and hopefully that generator will be completed by midsummer. And at Parkway School, we did some well pump room improvements. So these are all items that we're able to do without really accessing or entering into any of the program spaces of the schools. So we won't have to go back and do any deep cleaning. So we're in good shape.
Dan, thanks
Thank
for
you,
that.
Dan.
Yeah. Could you actually share that with us, the memo? That I think that would be helpful. One follow-up question on the Eastern Middle School, the HVAC. I seem to recall that there's a pretty big dollar amount in this year's budget for HVAC. It's $4 million, and I don't have the detail sheet right in front of me, but I think a fair amount of that was going towards Eastern. Does that mean that you've been able to do that project with this year's capital, and how did that work in terms of what capital that you had allocated and how much you needed versus what's in next year's budget for it?
We were able to complete it with monies that remain from the previous phase that were going to be used in the next phase. So it's really just shifting dollars around, not from phase to phase, but from scope of work to scope of work.
So you still need the money that's in this year's upcoming budget to complete this project?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I see Jeff's hand up again. Jeff, you need to unmute yourself. No, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just did. Sean, in your response to the inquiry that Mrs. Moriarty made, you said your words were, I think, that you could be exposed to an additional $1.5 million on the out-of-district tuition and special ed. We'll be looking at that 5.4. I don't necessarily want to fund it at the outer limits of what you could be exposed for. I was looking more for a reasoned approximation of what you think it likely might be. Is the 1.5 more than you think might actually be required?
It could be a smidge higher than 1.5, but it all depends on the way this is calculated. It's looking at the current base of students who is going to continue next year, also exclude any students that we know will either graduate, exit, whatever. So those are excluded. And then the big question is, how many new ones will we get in? That's the question. So I would say last night I think I used 1.2 to 1.5, but probably closer to 1.5 is my closest to the pin view right now.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions on this application? Okay, so Leslie, you don't have any more either. I see you kind of, okay. I wanted to take this opportunity, Tony and Sean, just to ask the questions since we're seeing you today about any impact of the COVID-19 delays on the state reimbursements for construction for GHS MESA construction. I think that we believe the deadline for the submission is June 30th. And so, you may not be prepared, and we certainly understand this, but we were wondering, does the BOE expect to meet the deadline? Are there any governor's executive orders to cover this extension if necessary? Anything you could shed the light on would be great. Otherwise, we'll wait until next month to hear more on this update.
But when I first heard about the executive order and extensions, I wasn't quite sure if it applied to, the construction, the submissions. And I have asked the question from someone who's working on this for us. Haven't yet gotten a crisp answer. But as it relates to the two projects that are due to be filed by June 30th, one is MISA, and that will definitely be ready to go, will be submitted prior to June 30th. The other one is Hamilton, and we are gathering all of the documentation now, and we anticipate we will also be ready to file before the June 30 deadline.
That's great. And also, when did the BOE accept the Glendale construction project? I mean, is there a deadline on that one? Do we know what that is, Sean? Thank you for this other information.
Sure, no problem. I am not aware that that has been accepted yet. Or that one has not come on the radar yet.
Okay, thank you. And you'll just check over the next month just to make sure that.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you
And
so
I think
much.
I think you'll be pleased with the outcome of the MISA project.
Fabulous. Well, it's a great project and a great project for all. So are we ready as a budget committee to discuss ED 11 and how we should move forward on this? Do I have any comments? I would suggest our three other budget committee members unmute themselves for this discussion. Ms. Hess, Deborah?
So I would make a motion to postpone this to next month's meeting, based on the conversation last night at the Education Committee meeting and the fact that the Board of Ed is working towards trying to finalize this number. So I would wait. I would make a motion to postpone until next month.
And I would second that.
So are we ready to vote now? Deborah?
Yep.
Hess?
Yes. Deborah Hess, yes.
Leslie Moriarty?
Leslie Moriarty, yes.
Jeff Raymer?
Jeff Raymer, yes.
And Leslie Tarkington also yes. So that motion to defer this until the May Budget Committee meeting has passed unanimously, 4-0-0. So I think that we will move to the new business items. If our Board of Education and, schools, staff and friends want to leave this meeting, they're certainly welcome to do it. They're certainly also welcome to stay, but they are no longer up as panelists, if that is okay. So either thank you so much and stay healthy and safe, or we'll say the same thing similarly at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So now we're going to move on to the first new business item, which is a discussion of the governor's executive order 7S relating to taxes. And I believe we have working on this and who will be presenting Heather Smeriglio, our tax collector. And in addition, I know she's been supported by Amina Ahmad, and Karen Fasciolotis, I think, has been involved from the BET standpoint. If there are others that Heather thinks that we should bring up on this discussion, certainly we'll do that.
I just wanted to clarify, Leslie, that I was the person that was coordinating all of the documents, but Heather was the lead on this and was the person that is responsible and is the person that's responsible for this program.
Clearly, Karen, I thought I'd said, she is the tax collector and this is a tax collection, item. And so I am looking for Heather on my screen here.
Hi there, Leslie. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you on the phone?
Great. No, I'm on the video, but however, my face didn't come up, so we just have my name.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I see you there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see.
So Heather, are you're presenting this item to us?
Yes. Thank you for having me at the meeting. Well, as everyone knows, due to the COVID-19, the governor has issued Executive Order 7S, and that is the suspension and modification of tax collection and collection efforts. Okay, so the state has established two different programs One is the deferment program and also the low interest rate program. The town must offer at least one of the plans or can choose to offer both plans. As far as the deferment program, what that entails is that it actually just basically moves out the due dates. So right now we have our sewer assessment program in the North Miami area that is currently due April 1. So that would be moved out to July 1. And then the taxes that come due July 1st in the first installment, those would become due October 1st. In this program, we can either choose to do it by application or it can be extended to all taxpayers with no application. So that's the deferment program. The other program, the low rate program, there would be no application. All due dates would remain the same. What would change in this program is that if you went late past August 3rd, or in the case with the sewers, past May 1st, rather than the 1.5% state statute charge for the interest, it would drop down to 0.25 per month. And this would be in effect just for the 90 days. And also, it would only take effect if someone was making payments within those 3 months. Neither program applies to a person who is having their taxes escrowed either through their bank or through a mortgage company. And with the program, we need to notify OPM no later than April 25th. And let's see what else. So it's my recommendation to go with the deferment program, which would push out the due dates and just blanket it to all the residents of Greenwich. I feel that during this pandemic, a lot of people have been affected. Now that the governor has extended the dates of going back to work, out to May 20th, a lot of people have lost their income, have lost their jobs, have lost loved ones. I think there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress out there. So I would like to see it done across the board. I think it would, just relieve any undue burden to the taxpayers. And it would also be easier to administer in the tax office. So that's my presentation. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'd be happy to answer, or if Karen would like to jump in, or Amina.
I think you all know that it's the RTM that's responsible for, obviously accepting one or both of the programs. It is on their call. Heather has been going to the committee meetings that are taking this up. Yesterday was Finance and Legislative and Rules. Tonight will be the BOC. And they will be voting on one or both of the programs on Monday. Both the Finance Committee and the Legislative and Rules Committee adopted the deferment program. The Legislative and Rules Committee had a lengthy debate. There were some follow-up questions with respect to the amounts of money lost. I know that Heather recirculated the worksheet. There was a decimal point error with the potential loss due to investment in the deferment program, based on the assumption of 20 to 25% people paying taxes on time, with the rest deferring. And again, those are all guesstimates. We don't know how many people would actually defer. It could be 100% minus the escrow amount. The escrow, those that pay through their mortgage through an escrow account will still have to pay that on time. Pete and Heather worked the numbers, and that amounts to about $50 million. So that amount is guaranteed more or less, coming in on time.
Karen, may I just start, how many tax accounts is that? Is there an estimate?
I would leave that to Heather. I have no idea.
Okay, thank you.
But she ran the report and had those numbers. And if she doesn't have it today, I'm sure she can get back to you on it.
So, Deborah Hess. So
Deborah?
we're just, that was going to be my point. So thank you, Karen, that this is actually going to be taken up at the art. So is there anything that we need to do here? It's really the RTM that'll decide. And then based on that, do we need to take up a vote here, or is this more informational for us?
Well, personally, I think it's more informational, but obviously it will affect our cash flow.
Yes.
So we need, as a BET, to be able to manage that with Pete, Minarski and Roland at the helm. Pete is of the opinion, and if he's on, you're right there, Pete. He can correct me.
Can I just interrupt, because I had forwarded a couple questions to Pete before this meeting about the cash flow. I'd like to go over those responses, because there may be an action that we as a BET want to consider. We don't have to do it this month necessarily, but if we at all feel concerned about cash flow and want to consider tax appreciation notes, then we need to get authority to do that, to be ready to go just in case. So Pete, the questions I have.
Leslie, has Karen finished her presentation, and then we'll come to you, knowing that you have these questions about the cash flows. Karen, have you finished your presentation?
Well, no, I just wanted to state that if you go through the explanos, Pete, obviously had some input and went through the numbers, and it was his opinion and the opinion that was expressed to the RTM last night that we would not have to float any notes, or take any borrowing, in the near term, but I will let him speak to that, and I will stop now.
Thank you, Karen. Leslie, do you want to go through your questions, and then Pete can perhaps go through the responses he gave to your questions? Because again, some of this is sort of being done inside, and obviously this meeting is being both transmitted by the Zoom as well as television. So help our audience here.
Right. So what I wanted to explore to make sure that we fully explored was the worst case scenario in terms of impact on the town's cash. And that is if all eligible taxpayers deferred their payment to the last day, what does the town have sufficient resources to be able to continue to operate based on our proposed fiscal 21 budget right now, and how close are we to feeling comfortable with that we have sufficient funds? What alternatives might we have? And so I'll let Pete share his response.
Pete?
The first scenario that nobody pays, correct?
Except for those that are required, the ones.
Yeah, it's this one-page document that I sent to everybody is the cash forecast. It's got 13 years of cash balances by month for the last 13 years. I highly recommend you look at it, because it shows you the trends through the end of each month, July, August, September, the period in question. It's far-fetched that every single person would not pay, but a good portion of them would take advantage, similar to the IRS, letting you pay if 3 months after April 15th. If you looked at this document, you could see clearly that we can cover probably up to $150 million just in the general fund. Now, there is money available in other funds to cover that. The general fund, basically, we have the system of due to, due from, where the general fund pays OPEB bills, pays all the retirement expenses for 12 months and trues it up at the end of the year. The Z fund, which is the capital projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe in the letter that I sent, that's in the package, there was at June 30th last year, $70 million available. So number one, based on the cash flows over the last 3 years, we can cover comfortably over 100 million. It would get close if you didn't get 150. The reason I use $150 million is Heather and I we went over the tax collections last year for July and August. And you could see in the same document at the very top where it has July and August, we collected with the advance payments, $215 million that included sewer maintenance and sewer improvement. So worst case, meaning nobody paid, we probably would have enough cash without tapping the 70 million or the pension contribution.
Would you be able to delay those transfers and the contributions till October 1st, just to be sure that we can cover the cash needs of the town? Because the alternative is to move forward with preparing a tax appreciation note to issue just in case we need. But that takes time and resources to do.
I've already been contacted by Michael Wasik from the retirement board. It would not be popular. In my email that went to the full BET to your questions, I don't know who has the authority to do that. I talked to Greg Stump this morning, the actuary. He said it would have no impact on the actuary report. It would be considered a one-time event. The question came from at least 2 RTM members. Well, what's the financial impact? Who knows? If you sent the $26.1 million to the retirement board March 1st, it would evaporate. 30% of it would have gone as far as investment losses. So we don't know as far as the bigger question is, what is the financial impact? We would give normally $26.1 million to Neuberger Berman in the first or second week of July. And we don't know at this point where they're going to put the monies. And if we knew where they were going to put the monies, we wouldn't know what the financial results would be until October of next year. But that is turning out to be not a popular decision, but it would be an alternative in a worst case situation to going to tax anticipation notes, which there's a cost to that. So alternative one is hopefully we cover it with the general fund based on the document I sent. There's enough money there based on past performance. Alternative one would be covered by the other funds. There's up to 70 million last year. Alternative 3 would be delaying the OPEB and the pension, which is about 30 million. And then alternative 4 would be the tax anticipation notes.
The thing is you won't know whether you need the cash, whether you need the contributions for OPEB and the cash that we would have given to OPEB and the retirement board July 1st at the time that when you might need the funds, which is September and October. So you have to make that decision before we have full information over how many taxpayers will be using the deferral. So the issue that I'm considering, and I think our board needs to consider, is whether we move forward to put in place the ability to issue a tax, a tax?
The acronym is TANs, T-A-N.
Whether we put in place the ability, to issue a TAN in case we need it. And we have to think about that in advance because it takes both BET and RTM approval to do that.
Okay, if there's concurrence with the other 11 members of the BET, I also spoke to Robinson and Cole on Sunday. They would draft a resolution. We could attach that in the, I don't have the dates, decision day, when we vote on the regular bond resolutions. We're attaching also a bond resolution that's already been prepared to do refunding for up to 24 months. The savings went away, so that's not happening at this time. But we could also attach the tax anticipation note resolution for BET in late April and the RTM in June, and you will have it in place.
Okay, so this may be an issue I think the full BET may want to take up. Other members on the budget committee may want to talk about that now, but we can take it up to decide to talk about it next Monday as well.
Yeah, I would just also though caution, certain representations were made based on what Pete and Heather had said yesterday to the RTM. And they're making decisions based on those representations as to what program to go to. And the representations was that no additional borrowings, et cetera, would be needed. So I would suggest that if that's the route we're going, we need to communicate that as soon as possible to the RTM.
Yeah, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty here. We look at the cash balances and you can say if, our operating burn rate's about 30 to 35 million a month. That doesn't include anything for capital, which has I think a lumpier distribution of cash. If you say that there's 100 million in the general fund through October, that gets us through October just about. Then we have the other funds that could help provide cash if necessary. So, on the surface, it looks like it. The question is, as a BET, whether we think we need to have the insurance prepared to go in case something else unforeseen occurs. Because the issue with the OPEB and the pension contribution is that decision's got to be made early July before we really know the impact.
No, and I think we all understand that, Leslie. I'm just saying that, this would be a contingency plan. It's not something that we anticipate
Right.
Using, but it would be in place in case we needed it for whatever unforeseen reason.
I would also add that there's a difference in terms of charter requirements and, the pension fund and how we fund it, or OPEB and how we fund that also. So I do think, as Karen has said, representations are being made to the RTM. And I think Pete has prepared the most likely scenario here. And it's always good to look at worst case. So I'm glad that, it's being brought up and it's being considered and that we know what we have to do, but whether we need to do that so imminently, as you point out today or next Monday, or whether that's something that also could be moved ahead for our next meeting. Deborah, did you have some questions here?
I just was trying to understand the contingency nature of it and how much time would it really require if we didn't consider it now and waited to do it later if we really needed it. I don't know that it's a conversation we need to have now, but I would like to just understand that a little bit better. But I think we can table it, some of my questions and for the next time we bring it up.
Jeff? Jeff, you need to unmute yourself. Jeff, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. So I assume that's the issuance of a bond. Issuance of a bond requires a vote, as Mrs. Moriarty pointed out, a majority of the RTM. It actually requires a vote of the majority of the whole membership. Hard to get in the summertime. If you call it a special meeting of the RTM or something. So I'm not sure that, you could have it, I suppose, on the agenda of the RTM at their September meeting, but you're cutting it kind of close. But I think that's Mrs. Moriarty's point, that it might be awkward if you didn't deal with it at the May meeting, if you then tried to deal with authorizing a tax anticipation note at the June meeting when they're already taking up the budget. That's not so welcome at the RTM. So you just think that piece of it through. I had two very petty points I wanted to just touch on. I'm sorry to be petty. If we were to do the deferment without doing the low interest rate program, which certainly is a possibility, as what the RTM seemed to be favoring, if I understood correctly. Heather had said something to the effect of extending for 90 days the date on which the taxes are due and payable. Actually, the executive order says it's a deferment of 90 days from the date that it became due and payable. So it's actually an extension of time in which to pay. You want to be careful about that, because if the taxes aren't paid, the interest at 18% would run from the date on which they were due, and you wouldn't want to have given away 90 days worth of interest just because you put the word due in there into your resolution rather than just say payable. It would be good if the RTM, if they did this, would be electing to do a deferment on the payment of taxes, not the due and payable. The other thing was that Heather said something about that the 3% only applies if the taxpayer, I'm sorry, on the low interest program. Heather had said that the 3% only applies if the taxpayer made payments during the period. I didn't follow that exactly, and I didn't see that in the executive order. Could I ask for a clarification on that?
Is Heather still on?
Heather, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you.
There's if you go to page 3 on the Office of Policy and Management Guidance document that I sent out.
Okay, I don't have that in front of me. But go
Okay,
ahead
well,
and read from it if you would. I'm sorry.
sure. It says, for the time period from May 1st, 2020 to July 1, 2020, the delinquent taxpayer pays 0.25 per month or a portion thereof instead of the normal 1.5 per month, but only on those last 3 months and only if they are making a payment. So they have to be making a payment. That's what the order says.
Okay.
Which kind of makes, it's kind of common sense.
Is it? I didn't see that in the executive order, but if OPM is going to say that's how it works, I'll accept that OPM is telling me how it works. It just wasn't in the executive order. Mhm.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay.
May I ask a question? We've talked always about our, property taxes, but we also have sewer taxes. Heather, have you and Pete also looked at the impact on the sewer? I see that Mike Mason's hand is up. The sewer, the impact on the sewer taxes, since we have a different constituency that pays sewer taxes, and if it's, you see something similar to, that you got on the, property taxes, or is this, are we going to see some different history here and different impact in terms of payment? And I'll start with you, Heather, and then I guess Pete.
Okay, sure. Well, the sewer project that was due in January, that project is over with. That's the Millbrook project, and that one we've already collected on. So what's being looked at right now is the North Mianus project, and currently it's about 1.3 in bills that were sent out. I'm very encouraged because I've been coming in every day. We've been having mail delivery Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Just yesterday alone, in that sewer payments that came in was about $250,000 in yesterday's mail alone. So I'm very encouraged that most of these sewer payments will be paid. That, at least that's what I'm hoping for. Yesterday was very encouraging with that.
So that's great news, Heather. Now, what about the operating taxes that are due for the sewer maintenance fund from, again, it's somewhat different constituency because we have a large group of, tax exempts in this particular, within the sewer district, although they don't necessarily pay a large percentage of the taxes, but just wondering if that particular segment has been looked at, or perhaps I should be turning to Pete.
I don't understand the question. Maybe Heather can answer it.
Well, we have the taxes due, as I read everything. It also includes the taxes that those of us in the sewer maintenance district pay to the sewer funds. And those, are obviously separate funds, the sewer maintenance fund. So are we looking at that as sort of the same percentage, and you're doing it, you've combined sewer taxes with property taxes? I just want to make sure that we're looking at both.
Okay, in all of my previous comments, when I said last July and August, we collected 215 million, that included the sewer maintenance and sewer improvement. So all of the scenarios, all of the estimates in foregone interest, et cetera, includes, it's collectively the general fund, the sewer maintenance, and the sewer improvement. And I
Correct.
still don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
And will there be any impact on the sewer fund with this delay, since this is a separate fund, the sewer maintenance fund, which is where the sewer operating taxes go?
Maybe Heather, you're going to help me. I don't understand the question.
Are you talking about the current sewer project, the one in North Miamis, or are you talking about what comes due in July where you have your regular payment that includes your sewer maintenance and sewer improvement?
Yeah.
Yes, Heather, I am talking about, yes, the North Miamis and Millbrook are sewer bonds, capital bonds being repaid. I'm talking about the annual operating charges that come to us twice a year, billed twice a year, that go to fund the sewer maintenance fund.
Those would be deferred as well, Leslie. So
Correct.
Yes, no, I'm aware that they're being deferred. I was just wondering whether we were looking at those any differently, since it's a different group, and if we looked at the funds separately within the fund.
From the
That was my
materials,
question.
I read, there was no carve out, so we can't, say how much today. I mean, I suppose I'm not sure how they're accounted for, but maybe we could ask Heather to take a look at it and see, what the impact was if there's a reduction of 80%. But it will be impacted because it's part of the deferral. It's not that you're not going to get the money eventually, but you're not going to get it by August 3rd.
Right, and I just wanted to make sure that and maybe Pete can take a look at it with Heather, make sure we're differentiating between which funds the money is going. Are there any other questions? Ms. Moriarty, Ms. Hess, Mr. Raymer?
Yes, if I can, Leslie Moriarty. I did just want to clarify something. It was clearly not my lack of understanding over the regulations, but Heather, you talked about that liens, the current statutes for liens stay in place. I just wanted to clarify that the extending the payment for 3 months does not put any of those taxpayers at risk of having a lien placed against their property.
No, there would be no lien placed against their property. What happens is currently this May, we're putting liens on for people that haven't paid last year. So for these people that are part of the deferment program, the only way they would have a lien placed on their property was if they didn't pay at all. And a lien would be placed May of 2021 for the properties that did not pay this year.
May 2021 for properties not paying the tax payment that was due on July 1.
Correct.
Prior year. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So now I'd like to call on Michael Mason, who's had his hand up.
Hello, everyone. I want to get back to the conversation about the TAN. Let's bring everybody back to 2008. Now, I'd like to start out. It wasn't as severe at that point with the business reductions in town, but it was the controller, Peter Minarski, who at that time had put us on notice that the town needed a fund balance. And the fact that we have the fund balance now to cover us is a remarkable thing. And I just want to thank Peter. But I think we owe it as residents and taxpayers. If we're going to talk about having to do something like that, I think we ought to talk about the entire picture. I think we need to look at reducing the burn rate. If we're in a situation where we have to go through our fund balance that much, we ought to be also putting together the package about reducing the burn rate. Let's talk about the capital appropriations. There's a bunch of capital appropriations, as you know, from the capital appropriation statement that have not been committed yet. And I'm not really exactly sure how we would stop those from being committed, or the ones that are in process, putting those on hold. But I think if we're going to have a conversation, which I'm not ready for yet as far as this Monday, if we're going to have that conversation, I think we better be prepared to have the full conversation. If you attended those meetings last night, you heard people even talking about when it came to the Board of Ed's interim appropriation. Well, if they don't get the savings, that they should find other savings. Those conversations happened last night. So I think we need to be prepared to not just look for a TAN to do this. I think we certainly could say we have at least 5 or 6 months in the worst case scenario. And I think we have to look at the trend. So I think we ought to be very clear and understand what we're embarking on. We need to do the whole package, not just part of the package.
Can I respond or ask a question? Leslie, you have to unmute, sorry. Can I respond?
No, I'd first like to thank Mike for those comments because I think they're very important that people think about them. You know, we can't always continue to increase the burden on our taxpayers. We have to look at this with the same kind of balance that we've looked at, we'll call them historic events in the past. And we should have learned from those events. And I thank Mike for these comments. And now, Leslie.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think it's important to point out that there are responses you take to short-term events and responses you take to long-term events. And when we're talking here about this particular cash flow item and the receipt of property taxes, of which we've received, I believe, about 99% of our property tax revenue historically, that this is a short-term cash flow issue that I'm speaking about here and that we need to be prepared for that. When you talk about reducing operating expenses or reducing capital, those are more medium and long-term responses you take to issues that you see. I think it's important for us to differentiate that.
Well, I can agree with that point. I think we need to look at the entire package when we look at such things, which would include both the short, the medium, and the long term, and just as we always do on all of these issues. So do I have any input from the committee? Do we want to give any kind of indication to the RTM as they continue to meet in their committee meetings that we're all leaning to support Heather's position and her recommendation, even though we don't have the authority as such, as I understand it. But nevertheless, I think we've all appreciate the work done by Heather and her team. And she has made a decision and a recommendation. And I'm, you know, certainly based on the information, the input that we have from, you know, Pete Minarski and I'm sure Roland and the team, I'm prepared to support that. And I thank Karen for all the work she's done on this. So do we want to give any indication to the RTM as we go through the committees that we're leaning towards, you know, Heather's alternative? I see Deborah's hand up.
So I would be willing to say that I support our tax collector. And I also, when I look through the materials, you know, Pete, our comptroller, was also supporting the recommendation. And so I would think when you have a recommendation coming both from our tax collector and our comptroller, and it was, I thought it was very good how it was laid out. So I'm, if the rest of the committee is willing to do it, I'm willing to, I realize we're not going to vote, but willing to say that I'm willing to support the proposal and the recommendation as put forth by the tax collector and our comptroller.
I see Leslie's hand up first and then Jeff's.
Jeff was before me. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I may have missed that.
Just wondering.
If who would like to go first? Jeff? I guess Leslie is saying Jeff can go first.
No, Leslie can go.
All right. So if our committee would like to vote to take up a motion that's not on our agenda, this is not a special meeting, so we can add to our agenda. The motion that I would craft is that the Budget Committee supports believes that we have the financial ability to support the recommendation of the tax collector to extend the tax deferment to all taxpayers, all eligible taxpayers.
Which is it eligible?
Which is everybody. We're not actually, yeah, we're not saying
eligible any longer,
Well,
the way I read the package.
Yeah, I'm just saying all taxpayers excluding the escrow, so accounts. I don't know how we craft that language.
Exactly that way.
Okay.
So Leslie, are you making that a motion that well, do we need to put anything on the agenda that we're going to take a vote? Or can we just move ahead
would-
since this is really indicative? It's not really, we don't have the authority.
So our Robert's Rules experts, we have the item on the agenda. We don't have it as an action item. So I think we would have to take a vote to add an action item to the agenda. That takes 2/3 approval. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yes, entirely correct. But actually,
I know, I actually wanted to hear from Jeff too, because he had his hand raised, and then we'll make sure that we cover Robert's Rules, whatever, after Jeff talks. Thank you, Jeff.
So I'm not very fond of the drift to go towards the sense of the meeting resolution type of things. That was the subtlety that was in Leslie's motion, that she was resisting the idea. I don't mean to speak for you, Leslie, but Leslie's motion resists suggesting to the RTM what the BET thinks it should be doing. And Leslie was limiting herself to discussing what we believe is the capability of the town's finances to support. That's okay, but actually I'm lukewarm to that too. This is by the explicit language of the executive order. This is the province of the legislative body of the town, that's the RTM. And I don't want to start to give to the RTM recommendations about what we think it should be doing in the exercise of its discretion. We've never done that, or rarely done that in the past. In recent years, we've leaned a little more towards this sort of sense of the meeting resolution, but I don't think that's where the BET ought to be. First of all, we as a budget committee are simply a committee of the BET. So normally a committee makes a recommendation to the whole body. So at best, we should be doing no more than making a recommendation to the full BET of whether it wants to consider making a suggestion. I don't think the BET should be doing that either. But at a minimum, I'd like to reserve this for a conversation at the full BET. And frankly, at that time, I'll be against voting on a recommendation then too.
So I'll just add to Jeff's comments that I've sort of brought this up because, we're all dealing with timing that's a bit more unusual and some change in timing of the RTM committee and district meetings that sort of coincide with ours, and then they have their next meeting Monday the same way we do. I just thought that it might be helpful, and I do hear what Jeff has to say, and I didn't consider it as an action item. I guess what I would like to do before we proceed and discuss this any further, unless Deborah has something more to add, is just to ask Karen as the chair of our law committee to weigh in here a little bit too for some input. And then of course, if Amina would like to do that, obviously representing, the town council, then obviously would like to hear from her too.
So Deborah Hess. So when I was suggesting support, I was thinking more like a straw, like informal, kind of like, yes. I understood Leslie Moriarty's point about just, we were really evaluating the financial aspect of it. I hear, but having said that, and I think that makes sense, but I also hear what Jeff has to say. So I don't know that I don't know that we should be doing a real motion here. And I think if we're going to do something like that, we should have the law committee weigh in, potentially the full BET. So not for the budget committee. Again, I was just, my point, I think somewhat where Leslie Moriarty was going is we've evaluated, which we were supposed to do, sort of the financial implications of what the program might do. And that's why I'm supportive generally, because both the tax collector, but also more importantly, that the comptroller has done the financial analysis behind it. So I would agree with Jeff for this moment that it's not something we should do a formal motion here at the budget, and we can see what it is that we should be doing at the full BET.
Thank you, Deborah. Karen, do you have any comments on this, or we're heading in the right direction?
I'm only one half of the law committee, but I would support Jeff, and say that at this point, a motion is not appropriate. And again, I've never seen the BET do a sense of the meeting resolution. Maybe there has been a time, but I don't recall it. So at this point in time, I would say that we should have the discussion at the full BET. I like the idea of a straw poll, which is non-binding. But again, I have to think about this a little longer as well.
Can Amina, and I see Leslie's hand up,
Yeah.
but Leslie, do you think, is there something after Karen before Amina you'd like to say, or should we just go to Amina?
Let me just clarify, because I think people misunderstood what I was trying to do here. I think the BET has a role to make a statement about the financial ability for the town to follow through on the recommendation or to support the recommendation. Can we financially do that? That's the vote that I think the BET should be taken, whether it's the budget committee, the full BET, but I think we need to speak as a voice. We have the controller on record. He reports to us, but as a board, we should come out and say, yes, we can support any of the three options that the RTM has, and don't have an issue with the recommendation being proposed. But I think that is a role for the BET.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm gonna switch here to Amina, and just since we sort of follow Karen here, see if she has any comments here, and then I'm coming back to Jeff.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the Budget Committee. This is Amina Ahmad, Assistant Town Attorney. So I think whether you do a straw poll or some other type of indication as to where you're headed, and whether you do it here at the Budget Committee level or at the full BET, I think it's really a matter of policy within your board and the full BET. But in terms of getting feedback to the RTM, as you mentioned, Madam Chairman, the timing is a little off here, right? So the RTM will be meeting on the 20th, and I think it would certainly help the members of the RTM and of course the BOC that's meeting tonight to get some sense of where your committee is. And even if you do it very informally, I think that would help them. But other than that, I think how you proceed, I think, is really a matter of policy and procedure that you would normally follow, either as a budget committee or in terms of a full BET. So that's really your decision.
Thank you, Amina. Jeff Raymer, please. No, Jeff, you're on mute.
Sorry. So drawing on the wisdom of Amina and Leslie, let me propose this maybe as a middle ground, that we as a budget committee could take our straw poll to acknowledge the analysis by our controller, and that his analysis would suggest that the town would be able to support any of the options which are called for by the Executive Order 7S.
So this is Deborah Hess. I don't know that I mean, yes, maybe financially we could support all of them, but I think that there's some record keeping and some incremental work that needs to be done in the low interest rate environment. So I mean, are we saying we're supporting any of them, or is it the one that's being put forth as the recommendation? That would be my preference.
The other thing, Jeff, is that if you look at Pete's analysis, he does support Heather's recommendation for the deferment program. So
yeah,
the
but
question,
I would like to resist making a recommendation. It's fine for Heather. Heather is a staff person and she looks at it and she can express a preference. It's advisory.
no, I
I'm only
understand.
thinking that, stay with me. I'm only thinking that as a matter of policy for us, that we should confine ourselves, stand back from the exercise of discretion as to which, because that's vested in the RTM, and I think it's unwelcome for us to kibitz them. I'd like to limit myself to the analysis that was brought to us, and that is the town has the capability to support any one of the three options.
So is there a middle ground here, Jeff, where we say that, and I'm
I
looking
thought
at
it was
this
proposed middle ground.
but no, that we, that a straw poll, that we acknowledge the analysis of the work done by Controller Peter Minarski in the package dated as of April 13th, 2020 to the RTM. I mean, again, not necessarily, taking a recommendation as such, but this is the analysis that we've seen in this package that Heather sent to Tom Byrne on April 13th, yesterday. I mean, can we do it that way? And that way, it seems to me we have some basis, and that's the work
Yeah.
that Peter did.
Yeah, I think that's fine. As a matter of fact, since that package includes some analysis by Heather as well, I think then as a matter of fairness, you ought to say that we ought to be saying that we acknowledge the information, the advice that we've received, both from the controller and from the tax collector, and note that the town has the financial capability to support any one of the three options that are before the RTM.
Well, I think the way Leslie worded it was better, not saying any one of the three options. Leslie,
I'm sorry, Deborah.
I'm okay with that. What would it say? Maybe we should be clear. What would it say?
You're good at crafting. Let's say acknowledge the information and advice from both the controller and the tax collector in the presentation, or I don't know, in the information attached to the is it a letter to Tom Byrne, moderator of the RTM, from Heather Smoriglio, dated April 13th, 2020, or something on that idea. You're better at crafting, but that doesn't take.
Because I think Deborah was not so keen about the next phrase I was going to say. And the next phrase, picking up from what Mrs. Moriarty said, I was going to say, and we acknowledge, and the budget committee acknowledges that the town appears to have the capability to support. Deborah didn't like saying the three options, so I would say to support. How do I say it without saying the three options? Has the ability to support any of the options before the RTM.
How about the programs? The programs outlined in the Executive Order 7S, Executive Order 7S, issued by Governor Lamont.
That's great. Can we say any?
Any? I mean, I think
I don't want to be suggesting that they should do both necessarily, although they have the right to choose to do so.
One or more of the programs.
Okay.
Well, then the more that you might do more.
Well,
Okay.
no, I mean, they debated that yesterday, and they understand that they can do one or more, but they settled on the one. So I think that the RTM is very clear that they're not going to be doing both. But, you know, they do have that option, so you can't prohibit them from
That's
doing
okay. Yeah, the one or more is great. I have no quarrel with that.
Leslie Moriarty, were you talking? Because you were on mute.
I'm sorry?
Leslie Moriarty is talking, but you're not.
I think that this is shifting into an odd direction. You talk about not having a sense of the meeting, but you're acknowledging information prepared for another body. I think you're making this overly complicated. Really what we're just saying is we're opining upon the financial ability of the town based on our role in that matter, to move ahead with implementing the RTM, implementing Executive Order 7S as determined by the RTM.
I like that. That's
okay. So Leslie, you want to make that just repeat it so that everyone can take it down? And then I see Mike's hand is up. So before we go any further, I want to call on Mike. I just want, or Mike, you want to speak first? And then Leslie can be writing that down, and let's hear from you.
First of all, the moderator asked for information from the tax collector, the controller, and the town attorney. Everything has been provided to him. It's in the package. You've all gotten it. The RTM is reviewing it. I cannot say thank you enough to Peter Winiarski for conveying the fiscal position of the town, and based off of the estimates on what we think will come in. I think the only thing the BET is what you're doing. Are you just saying that you agree with what Peter and Heather submitted, or are you saying you don't agree with it? I think this is just, I think it was very clear. I think if you were on the Board of Selectmen meeting, this is an RTM issue. I think from a fiscal point of view, our controller has offered all the information. If you don't like the information that he's given and you want to make something else up, then suggest that. Otherwise, we simply are reviewing every document that's part of this that's going to the RTM. I have heard not one single thing pop up where somebody is saying, no, I don't agree with that. That's the only that's the simplest message that we're conveying here. This is
So would you say nothing, Mike?
it's not do nothing. I mean, we simply are going to report to the moderator. You can report to the moderator that, you know, the budget committee has reviewed all the material in your package and let us know if you need anything else. It's just not any more complicated than that. We don't do sensitive meeting resolutions as a rule, and we shouldn't start here. And in my opinion, I've heard their dialogue last night was far more detailed than you can imagine for those on the meetings. They had some really good questions. I think we're done. I think we've done everything we can do. And Monday is our full BET meeting before their meeting. But unless you're trying to do something to inspire a change, the RTM gets this discretion. And I would say, how would we like it the next day with their input on our discretion on budgetary items? We're one branch of the government. We've done what was asked of us. The tax collector's done what was asked of her. The law department's done what was asked of the law department. Tom Burns' requests were right on the money, right on point, and everything's been done. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to hear the dialogue last night.
I heard about that.
All right, so the only, Mike, where I disagree is while the RTM didn't ask the BET for its view, the RTM asked the department that reports to us, as well as other officials. What I see is missing in here is a role for the BET as having the responsibility for the financial affairs of the town to acknowledge that we can support the recommendation provided to them or the other options. And I think from a charter responsibility perspective, there's a role there. If we don't take this action, it's going to happen anyway, but I kind of disagree that there isn't a role just because the RTM didn't ask for it. We still have the responsibility on the financial affairs.
So is this something that has to be done today? I don't know that it has to come from the budget committee then to the full BET. So might I suggest that this kind of gets worked on over the course of the next few days in advance of our meeting on Monday? I get the timing is off, but they have their meeting that night. But I think from this conversation, it's pretty clear that we support the financial analysis that's behind the recommendations and the program of this executive order. It's pretty clear from our discussion.
I think that, Deborah, quite frankly, based on what Mike has said, what we're saying here, maybe that's just we craft a sentence or two that we all could say at the various and sundry committee meetings that still will occur tonight, and the district meetings that occur Wednesday and Thursday. I think so often we look for similar, communications, such as the approval of our budget, whether each of us agreed for all the, different parts that go into the budget. When we go to the RTM committee and district meetings, we all agree with every part of that budget because that is what the budget committee has approved, and that, at least at that point. So in this case, again, I think it's very awkward timing. And the awkward timing is due to all of us having to adjust all of our programs for this, COVID-19, crisis. So, I just, I agree on the state of it. So maybe we don't vote. Maybe we just sort of have this common sentence that we're all talking about, and this is sufficient, and we know our direction, and we thank, as Mike has said. I mean, I'm always grateful to Pete and Roland for all their work, but particularly for all the work that everyone has done throughout this whole period of time. It's not been easy for anyone, and we all appreciate and Heather, by the way, Heather's done a stellar job to get this done. So quickly with the support from the law department and, Karen and everyone, that this has gone to the RTM when it was just heard, rightly or wrongly, at the BOS meeting on Thursday. And then we had the long holiday weekend in between. So any other comments? Do we want to make a statement? Do we want to have a sentence or
No.
just move on?
I mean, I
Deborah?
think we know, I think just given all the dialogue, I think we should just move on from the budget committee perspective at this point, having listened to what everybody's saying.
Leslie?
I think that's fine. I don't know if you want to take a straw poll so that when we go to our district meetings and committee meetings that we can say that there is agreement among members, though a vote wasn't taken, that we support the financial analysis presented by the controller.
Okay, and Jeff, any comments on that?
Yeah, sure, I'll go along with that.
Deborah?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so you want to state the straw poll, Leslie, and then we'll all take a straw poll? And I guess we put up our hands, don't we? We'll have to.
No, don't do that because it's a vote. Leslie will express the point of view, and then each of us in turn will acknowledge that, yes, I'm generally of the same mind, and leave it at that. Don't start to take straw polls. That's really a vote, and I'd rather not do a vote. Leslie, want to state the proposition?
I think I just stated it 30 seconds ago, and that is that the BET members agree with the analysis, or agree with the ability of the town to fund and any of the options contained in the executive order as represented in the analysis by the controller and the tax collector.
Yeah, I agree with that proposition.
That's fine.
Okay.
But we're not going to vote. That's the statement.
No, yeah,
Got it.
there was a discussion at the budget committee, and we all seem to agree.
Got it. So you guys both sort of got your way. There you go.
Solomon strikes again. Yeah.
Great,
All right.
guys. So I guess thank you very much. It's and thank you for Heather and everyone who's worked on this to bring it to this point. This, I think, is an excellent alternative for the taxpayers who are obviously facing many burdens that they had never anticipated at this point in time. So thanks to all. Should we move on to the next item, which is a discussion of economic conditions? And I think, Roland, you're the focal point of this one, right?
If you look at,
Should we just, I think.
if you turn to the page, we can start to talk about it.
So yeah, I've got my, the first page of revenues, conveyance taxes, building permits, interest. Do you want to just start and talk a little bit about where we are on conveyance taxes, and then any feedback that you might have from the building department at this point in time? If you've talked to anyone, if you haven't, we certainly understand.
Well, you can see that all three revenues are down. And looks like I think that trend's going to continue through the end of the year. I mean, some of the activity is still going on, but it's quite reduced.
Do you think that, I mean, obviously March is a month which probably had the lag from earlier people getting ready to file building permits, or people ready to close properties. So therefore there was some conveyance tax that will slow even more dramatically for, the rest of the period, April, May, and June. Are you getting any input in at all?
I haven't heard from anybody.
Deborah or Jeff? Deborah, do you have any questions about, we'll go page by page. Any of the questions about the revenues? Or Jeff? Or Jeff, I see Jeff has his hand up.
So, I mean, to a certain extent, one has to have the fortitude not to be driven into a panic by forces. One tries to be thoughtful and deliberate in your approach to these things. To my observation, I'll be interested in studying Roland's face as I say these things, but to my observation, from a revenue standpoint, I'm not worried about fiscal year 20. We're slightly more than 3/4 of the way through the year. Now, at this point, of course, we've collected all the taxes. That's 89.6 actually percent of our revenue stream comes out of the taxes. They were all collected last summer and last January. The conveyance taxes, that's only 1.2% of our budget. We budgeted $5 million. They're 71% collected. There's something less than $1.5 million left. Even if that dropped by 2/3, so that we're $1 million short of our budget on conveyance taxes. Building permits, that's only 1% of our budget. We budgeted that at $4.5 million. That's 77% collected at this point. Only $1 million remains, even if we only collected a quarter of that, so that we'd be short $750,000. Interest income, that's 0.4%. It's not a big piece of our budget. That's $1.75 million. It's already over collected. We've collected pretty much all of that, but let's say we collected nothing further from that, not a penny further of interest. And then on the state, we dramatically under budget every year. So we budgeted with the state to get just $224,000. And serendipitously, we've already collected $2.3 million. So the over collection from the state, more than we budgeted, more than wipes out any possible shortfall on the other. You can pretty much decide that we're not going to be short on revenue in the current year that we're in at all. We have a large fund balance. I don't know if you want to call it 56,000 or 62,000. We call it somewhere in the middle at about 58, not thousand, but $1 million. We have some demands on us. It seems to me that that I don't see a lot of extra revenue items. We're going to have some cleanup from COVID, but I think there's more likely to be some savings on our burn rate than anything else. I just don't think that for fiscal year 20 we're in any particular danger at all. I don't mean to be unmerciful on our taxpayers, but the tax burden we put on them for the current year is already out there. Looking forward to the new year, it's hard for us in the operating budget to give meaningful relief. A $2 million house is somewhere near the median. The median actually is slightly under $2 million, but a $2 million house is at the median. That median house at the new mill rate, the way it was projected before COVID hit, would have a tax burden on it of about $16,800 and change. If I reduce the budget by 2%, the budget that was proposed by 2%, that's a pretty big hit. I would be giving relief to that median taxpayer at the whopping sum of $335 for the year, $167 or $68 per tax payment. It's really a small change. And so for us to make meaningful difference to the burden on our taxpayer out of the operating budget is really a questionable venture. You'd have to make draconian changes to make any kind of an appreciable change. I think the issue really comes up on our capital budget of whether or not these conditions change our appetite to do capital projects. And I think a lot of that depends on things that we don't know. If we had a serendipitous result that the infection clears and the economy, particularly the local economy, bounces back very rapidly, then I would have felt like a damn fool if I would have upset the flow of capital projects. Conversely, if we have some long-standing 8 years of burden on us to wend our way out of the economic doldrums, I don't know that I want to have piled on a lot of capital projects. And so my own personal inclination, conversation that we could have more at the workshop, was to make very little change in my operating budget for fiscal year 21, but maybe to rather repetitively be imposing conditions on quite a number of the capital projects, to be saying about them that perhaps we want to wait before committing the capital project till we see how the economy is doing in July, August, or September. Things that we won't know in late April as we're voting on things, and certainly not even as the RTM votes on them in June. those are kind of my reactions. I feel like I just don't know what's going to be the effect of this COVID-19. That's the way my inclination is to approach it. I'm not quite as pessimistic as Roland was making it sound, particularly not for fiscal year 20.
I agree with you, Jeff. The current year looks pretty good. If you go to the last page of the detailed revenue by department, you'll see that we've already collected $121 million out of 429 with 3 months to go. And
we've collected 98.2%
right
of the entire revenue. The 421, 166 over 428, 880, et cetera, is 98.2%. We pretty much collected all the revenue.
Right.
Sorry to talk so long.
To the very back without taking care of the middle. So, you know, I do think we've had a good conversation on revenues, and we're very fortunate in terms of how they have kept up to the extent that they've kept up this year. Roland, would you like to talk a little bit about the burn rate in terms of the operational expenses of the departments? And, you know.
Yeah, the expenses are actually, compared to last year, we are spending below the annual budget. Not by much, but 1%, which is a few $1 million, especially if you exclude the Board of Ed sped. So on the spending side, we're doing all right.
So, you know, it looks then like our anticipations for the year, with a lot of, you know, still unknowns, we're making good progress. Hey, Leslie has her hand up.
Yeah, I was looking at the same numbers everyone else is looking at, just to put the revenue number into context. So our budgeted revenue at 429 million, we've already collected 421. So we're only 7 million short between now and the end of the year on revenue. So we're pretty much made that budget. On the expense side, if you use last year's experience, at this point, as of March year to date for last year, that was 86.8% of the projected full year expenses. And that included a full recreation program, which we're not going to have this year. So those expenses will be lower. That would mean that our projected full year expenses would come in at 378 million. And that's compared to the 390 million budget. So again, you can't always compare. We may have some higher expenses, but as Roland said, just using that financial analysis, we're going to come in 12 million less in expenses. We're going to maybe be 7 million short of our revenue, but that means that there'll be money that would normally go to fund balance. Now, when we asked this question last month or the prior months of Pete and Roland, where do we expect to end the year in fund balance? We've had some additional appropriations, but your thought at that point was that we would be flat, that we probably wouldn't have much addition to fund balance by the end of this year. That looks like we may actually have some increase in fund balance, or am I looking at these numbers differently than you? So that's a question to Pete or to Roland. Pete, you have to unmute yourself.
The answer to the question is still the same. And you almost answered it when you said that we're going to return about $12 million to the fund balance. What all that's actually doing is offsetting the use of fund balance from the previous year. So I think, let me just look back. I think we used 12 plus 3, I think it was 15 million.
Yeah.
So the 12 million leaves you about $3 million short. And I anticipate we're going to collect more than 100% of the revenues at the rate we're going, a couple million. So that the answer is still the same. notwithstanding what's going to happen in the next 2.5 months, we're going to break even. So we're going to end up at 62.8 million. One of the unknowns is the $12 million figure return to fund balance on the expenditure side. Expenditures have really dropped off, and I don't know if they're queuing up, and if there's going to be a tremendous amount of encumbrance at the end of the year, at June 30th, for a couple reasons. Is number one is we don't know what the budget's going to be, and sometimes towns have a tendency to over encumber as a protection against expenses they've lost in the next year, so that they're protected as far as the July, August, September period. So my answer is still the same. We're going to come in around 62.8. We have three factors in this in the BET policy. We're still around $10 million of capital non-recurring. We've got replenished basically all of the monies that we lost from the 4 floods in the schools, and we're at $2 million at the risk fund. It doesn't. I think Vince Marino told somebody at one of the meetings that he didn't anticipate any lawsuits throughout the rest of the year. So the risk fund will be replenished, plus the $3 million that comes in next year. So we're collectively in pretty good shape. To Jeff Framer's prior point, 1920 is okay. There's no concerns for 1920. Everything, the concerns kick in when you look at the revenue losses for 2021 and what you're going to, you plural, the BET, are going to end up setting as a mill rate.
What are the major categories that you see at risk in the 21 budget? I mean,
revenues?
Yeah.
The interest income, 2 million. Conveyance tax, 500,000. Building permits, 750,000. Organized recreation, beaches, potentially for over $1 million. We know we lost spring programs. We don't know. For example, we collect $1 million on beach cards. Do we make the assumption that everybody's going to renew their beach card if they? Usually, a lot of it happens around Memorial Day. But do we lose the summer beach programs? So that's about 4.3. On the state side, we know that the state is getting hammered big time. They have a $2-point-something billion rainy fund. They've already conceded. The treasurer's conceded and Ned Lamont's conceded. It's gone. They've got tremendous expenses. We don't know where this is going to end as far as the pandemic expenses from COVID-19. What's at risk is LoCEP, 320,000, ECS, 378, pilot for the hospital, 674,000. There's the telephone grant. So we're looking at 1.6 on the state side. In the past, Ben Barnes and Malloy took that away from us when they tried to balance their budgets. So to answer your question, we're looking at a $6 million revenue shortfall. That's on the revenue side answer.
That's versus what came out of the recommended budget from the budget committee approved on March 3rd. Is that
correct?
What you're
Correct. Yes.
Thank you. I see Mike's hand up. Mike?
Just a quick question to Peter and Roland for the current fiscal year. I can't remember which meeting is that. There's an estimate of a number north of $2 million of invoices that could be sitting on departmental desks or in the mail unopened that hasn't gotten to finance yet to get paid. I just want to see if you have an update on that. And the other thing, I think what you might be leaving out going forward in the revenues for next year is the growth in the grant list, the potential for that to not be as high as it has been in the last couple of years.
I think it's the revenue one. The revenue one. The growth of the grant list, I can see that Lauren is here. So I'm going to defer to Lauren, who's an expert. I'm assuming that she's there because her name's up there. What was the third one? You said 3 areas.
No, it was only 2. Just the potential grant list change.
Yeah.
The other one was the invoices for this year. We were at a meeting and there was the talk of north of $2 million of invoices that might be on desks.
Anecdotally, I didn't hear that, Mike. Maybe Roland did. I didn't hear that.
I didn't either.
Yeah, it came from the treasurer, said that there could be a bunch of invoices, bills that haven't come in yet. Remember when we were starting to close down? They were trying to get everything paid as fast as they can, but they didn't have everything from the department heads because when the departments closed down. So there was a lag in paying, routine, regular invoices that were coming in.
From Natasha?
Yes.
We're current. We're current with the bills. No, let me qualify that. And I made the statement about 3 minutes ago. We don't know, to your point, what's not been paid as far as bills sitting on desks. We know that there's a lot of people that are not coming to work. We know that there's a number of Board of Ed bills that that probably aren't being paid because I guess principals aren't coming into the schools, et cetera, et cetera. All the essential utility and healthcare bills are being paid, but I don't know what's out there as far as the 2 million. If there's 2 million out there that we're not factoring in, to Leslie Moriarty's prior point, then the 12 million becomes 10 million that we return to the general fund.
The amount of the grand list has nothing whatever to do with the amount of our revenues. It has something to do with which landowners pay what piece of the pie, or what mill rate you had to assign to get to the revenues. But you generate out a budget, and then you budget for a mill rate that funds that budget. The grand list can go up, it can go down, it can stay the same, but shift which RTM districts are going to pay what percentage of it, and it doesn't affect your revenues.
Right. The grand list, the revenues from it are a zero-sum game. I see Lauren came up to the front and Pete had referred a question to her. So maybe Lauren would like to speak. I don't know if her picture has disappeared. Her video has disappeared. There she is.
Your grand list is set. The only thing you may not see this year, where we have in the past, is you're not going to see as many certificate of occupancy. You're not going to see that additional growth that we get after I set the grand list in the end of January. So you're not, I guarantee you, our certificate of occupancies, if the building department hasn't been there, there isn't any. So you're not going to see any additional growth. You're still going to see us do certificate of corrections reducing by people selling their cars and what have you. So you're going to lose money on your motor vehicles as you always do, but you also have the supplemental. So that's an even sum game. So the only thing you're really going to not see, I think, this year is the new growth that we get from the certificate of occupancies.
And even on the certificates of occupancy, all the projects that were begun before some date in early March, those people are still finishing their projects and getting COs issued, and we'll still be processing those COs. How many new building permits are going to be issued after March something or other? That's a whole other question. But a lot of those, you wouldn't have seen the certificates of occupancy by October 1st anyway.
Are the assumptions for the COs that would have been issued the end of this year or during the year included in that grand list number that we use to base a mill rate? That's all affecting the following year. So for fiscal 21, Mike's concern that we're not going to have the same grand list we expect, that's not true because the grand list is set already for fiscal 21. Okay.
Right.
So do we have any further comments on our economic condition?
I did want to make one other comment, or just to point something out we don't have information on, but when we talk about the status of the general fund balance at the end of this year, that doesn't include the other funds that we have in town. And we know there's a lot of change in the operational scenarios for both Nathaniel Witherell School Lunch Fund and the Golf Revolving Fund. Some of them are larger than others, impacts on the town, but clearly there are those other operations that we need to consider and we'll have to work with going forward.
So Leslie, I'll add to your comment. I think that was a good comment to bring up here. I think pointing to Nathaniel Witherell, we have to remember that Nathaniel Witherell is the town's second largest department, second only to schools. The other one that I would add to your grouping is the parking fund. When we go back to 2009, you know, a history that we talk about. We had, you know, things sort of, you know, moseyed around. But most of the or a large part of the revenues that come into the parking fund are really from parking in the downtown Greenwich area from all of the meters, and also then from the ticketing. And that activity is not occurring, and won't be occurring for the rest of this year. And my guess is, you know, going into sort of Jeff's point here, I think it will be very slow into, at minimum, the first quarter of the upcoming fiscal year. The other thing that was, we all know that that fund has been close to breaking even, and that in 2009, there was a transfer of employee or employees from the DPW into that, into the parking fund, the engineering signs and lines or some such DPW group. So that absorbed something out of the general fund, but now we have to look at the number of DPW people that are in the parking fund and just keep our eye on that as we look towards this upcoming budget and, you know, the balances in each of our funds. So I just want to make sure that we covered the parking fund in addition to the ones that you're talking about. And then remind ourselves that we did, in the budget committee's recommended budget, take care of the losses at Witherall to the extent that they were audited losses. And so that's addressed through June of 2019. So we've got to look at the current fiscal year and what's going to happen up there, as well as the upcoming year. Anyway, any additional?
On a less cheery note, a year from now, we'll be looking at a couple of large holes. I mean, even with the averaging, the 5-year averaging that we do on our contribution to the pension, I assume these COVID events will have an impact that's going to increase our contribution going forward in the budget that we're doing a year from now. Larry had said to us on Nathaniel Witherell that he was expecting that even after the 2.7 that we budget for Nathaniel Witherell, and even after we pay off 4.1 of accumulated negative fund balance in this year that they developed at Nathaniel Witherell before, he was saying earlier that he was expecting to fall short by about $2.5 million after application of the 2.7 million. And in recent conversations with him that many of us have had, I'm sort of secondhand to me, he's indicating that with COVID, he's had few referrals from the hospitals. They're running at a census of 70 some odd %. I don't know the exact number. And that the shortfall for this year is going to be more than the 2.5 million. I have no idea what the number is, but I'm speculating that we may end up with a negative fund balance at the end of this year at Nathaniel Witherell of about $4 million once again. And we'll have to be funding it a year from now, or will we wanting to fund it a year from now? So I think we're going to have some challenges a year from now.
Oh, I think so. I agree with you on that point, Jeff. So I think we'll just wrap up this section and move on to the approval of the budget committee meeting minutes. I think we circulated some additional we'll call it Scribner's comments on the budget committee public hearing and the regular meeting March 10th minutes. Do you want to approve them individually or together?
I'd make a motion to approve both minutes together if it's so agreeable with my colleagues.
And we have a second?
I'll second.
And those in favor?
Aye.
Deborah?
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
So that, Jeff, you wanted to say
Aye.
Raymond?
Yes, sorry.
Leslie?
Aye.
And
Leslie?
I approve.
Deborah?
I approve.
And I approve 4-0-0. So I want to again thank everyone, and you know, I'm glad we're all healthy and here on this meeting, and look forward to working together for our upcoming BET full meeting next Monday evening. So do I hear any other comments?
No, I just said thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
move to adjourn.
I'll second. I
Great.
second.
Okay, Leslie? Aye.
I'm in favor.
Okay.
Okay.
Be well.
4-0.